If you're watching this video, chances are you want to know how to replace your lower control arms on your 2003 to 2009, aka 4th generation Toyota 4Runners, and lucky for you, we'll be doing just that. So that's the old one. The new one, we'll be doing the passenger side, but same as the driver's side, just an opposite. So just an FYI on the tools you'll need. Light wouldn't hurt, rubber mallet for some love taps, sledgehammer, definitely gonna need that. Pliers, cutting pliers and adjustable pliers or adjustable wrench. Wire brush, pry bar, just in case. Penetrating oil, impact wrench, highly recommend, especially for the bolts on this thing. If you don't, breaker bar is fine, but obviously if you have one, go for it. Torque wrench, you need that. This is the one that goes up to 250 foot-pounds because one of them are pretty high up there in terms of torque. That's a pickle fork set. You need one of those. If you don't have one, that's fine. Local auto parts store, for example, Advanced Auto Parts, you could rent it for free. So get it, because you need it. A couple sockets, one wrench. You do need a 19mm closed end wrench. A punch, extension. So sockets 24, 22, 21, 19, and 12mm. You'll see which ones are used where. Not that many. So for the rear wheels, don't forget your wheel chocks. One in front of each rear wheel, and set the parking brake. Alright, so I'm at the front driver's side of the vehicle. Just have to lift or jack up the front of the vehicle on both sides. Now luckily this is a full framed vehicle, so you could jack it up and use the jack stands anywhere in the frame itself. A lot of space. So I find it easiest to put the jack over here and the jack stands right over here. Alright, so I got the jack stand in place. As you can tell, making pretty good contact on both sides. You can remove the jack stand, the floor jack. Just gonna put the safety collar in. Before you climb out of the vehicle, look at the jack up the other side, of course, and just give it a look to make sure it's making good contact. Then you're good to go. Once both sides are in, continue forward. Then just push on the car, little lateral force. Give it a nice knock. Nothing much, just a little something to make sure it's steady. Alright, so now I'm at the driver's side wheel. Got a 21mm socket. I do have an impact wrench if you don't use a breaker bar or ratchet, whatever you need, but makes it much easier. Now I'm on the passenger side, just going to repeat the same thing, 21mm socket. So I'm going to remove these front skid plate bolts first. That one's gone, so just this one. I've also taken off all these bolts in the past many times before, so I know they come off. But if you haven't in a while, use some penetrating oil, spray it on the bolts every way you could. Let it soak for a couple minutes, then come back. Again, 12mm. You can actually see that one. Just be careful when you take out that last bolt, because this thing is going to drop down at the pivot point, you'll see. doing this one-handed. So as you can see, it just drops down. All right, so that obviously is hanging down, and there are 2 tabs. Just pull it right off. Just gonna set this thing to the side. So once the car is jacked up, front skid plate is off, wheel is off, just gonna use some penetrant spray on all the bolts we're gonna be removing. Make our lives a little easier. So some bolts you're gonna be removing. Definitely these. These 2. This one. And these on the bottom. Hopefully you can see this one. So after you spray the bolts, just let it sit for a couple minutes, make your life a little easier. First off, we have to remove this cotter pin from the castle nut, or the stud technically. Gonna use some pliers for that. Oh, I'm definitely getting a tan in this heat. Definitely not reusing this. I also have a new one, so not necessary. Next up, gotta remove this castle nut. That's a 24mm. Just like this. However, you do want to rethread that on. A couple threads. You'll see why in a moment. Yeah, should be good. Alright, so next you're going to remove two bolts. This bolt and this one, same ones, just opposite side. 19mm. That's holding this little piece of hardware attached to this contraption. It's one bolt. Same thing on the other side. A little further back. Now we got these out. Next up, we got to separate this ball joint from the ball joint bracket. This piece of hardware is floating. It's just being held on by rust so far to the stud of the ball joint. This is one piece, that's another. So we're going to get a pickle fork and put this in here. However, Just gonna lift this whole hub up and on top of the lower control arm, get it out of the way a little bit. So now where the bolt mounted into, I'm having that rest on the lower control arm. And this bracket is free to move around. Technically you could pull it down, but I mean you should be able to, but you can't. So that's why we need a pickle fork. So now I'm going to take a pickle fork, this thing, and put it right here. And I'm going to hammer that. Air hammer. Again, if you don't have this, just use an actual hammer. And this is why I need a better air compressor. Bigger one, more powerful. Christmas list. See? Another reason you don't need one of those air compressors for this. Hammer though, definitely using that. Just gonna whack it. There we go. So, let's see. Free to move. Castle nut. Take that off. Pull this out. Clean it up. Or if you have a new one, get a new one, but if not, this one's fine. It's just a solid piece of metal. Works for me, no cracks, nothing. Rust is rust, it's just surface rust. I'm gonna clean that up, reuse it, and we'll continue. Next up, we have to remove the nut holding the strut, the bottom strut bolt in place, or the bottom strut in place with the bolt. Now, I did replace this like a year or two ago, so it's pretty new, and I know it's not really rusted. However, if this is rusted and the bolt just does not come out like it sees to the sleeve of the strut, you're gonna have to use a sawzall, a reciprocating saw, and cut the bolt out. Really not a big deal. You just have to cut it out. But then you also have to replace the strut because the bolt's gonna be seized in there and you can't put it back together. So if you want to, something you can do is just what the step we're about to do is taking the nut off. Do that step first before you take any of these other bolts off that we just did. If the nut comes off, good. And if you can hit the bolt so it slides just enough so you know it moves, you're good to go. If it's seized, then you want to maybe rethink doing this unless you're going to replace this strut too. So, okay, so need an extension. Let me move this away. I have a 19mm socket, or one should be fine too, on the nuts. 19mm on the bolt head. .22mm on the nut. So that nut came off pretty easily, and if you can hit this, it moves back and forth, so it's not seized, which means we're good to go to take it out. But if yours didn't move at all, even banging on it, or the nut just wouldn't come off, like for whatever reason, gotta cut the insides. Gotta cut the bolt between the strut and this mounting surface. Anyways, on with the video. So I'm reusing this, so I'm saving them. So next up, we're going to take these bolts off. However, if you're reusing them, to keep them, the alignment is close to how it is now, take a marker and just put a line on it so you know where it should be lined up to. I'm replacing them, so marking it's not going to do anything for me. I'm going to get an alignment anyways, so I'm not going to mark it. but if you are, mark it. Now take the bolts off. This is all 19 millimeter socket, 19 millimeter wrench. So before you take them off, take pictures of the area so you know which bolts go where, because they're two different bolts and the hardware is a little different, especially if you've never seen it before. Now the threads face the rear of the car. So the frontwards, this side of the control arm, the sleeve is what goes, this metal sleeve goes to the control arm and the bolt goes through the sleeve. You'll see it when I take it out. So again, it goes this way. This is the front of the car, this is the rear of the car. Put that to the side, keep it in the same orientation. Just use a pry bar to separate this cam adjustment, because I'm replacing all of this. Yep. So that's this piece. So this is a nut in itself. It threads into that. And again, I'll show you this later. Alright, so I'm leaving that in there for now. Just want to loosen up the other one first. So for the other side, okay, again, nut, bolt, 19 millimeter socket, 19 millimeter wrench. This is an awkward angle with the camera. So for this side, different type of bolt. So this bolt actually is what holds this control arm in place. On the other side you have this cam adjustment and the nut itself. Put that off to the side in the right orientation. So now we're ready to take it off. If you want to put your jack stand underneath the control arm, not a bad idea, but the strut bolt is keeping it in place, so I'm not too worried. Now we can pull this out. That's the bolt. Again, faces the rear of the car, front of the car. This side's free to move. Friction's holding it in place, but it's free to move. There's this groove. That's how this side looks. Back to the other side. Again, this is the passenger side, in case it wasn't obvious. And this is the side facing the front of the car. Now I'm actually kind of disappointed it's this easy to remove, because part of the reason I was doing this was because the alignment people told me something was seized, I needed to replace the control arm, and it would have to have been cut out. So I was really looking forward to using my Sawzall, because it's kind of fun to use if you're prepared. I was, but oh well. Easier rather than harder, can't complain. Anyways, so for this side, this is what it looks like. Bolt, sleeve, goes through, and then this threads on. That is a cam adjustment and a nut in one. So that's how that side works. Oh, sorry, it goes this way, that way. That's what it looks like. Gonna get this nut bolt out. Got a punch. Now the punch is holding the control arm in place. Bolt for the strut, keeping that, reusing it. Alright, so be careful when you take this out, because nothing else is holding the control arm except for friction. Alright, that's it. It's out. Yeah, that was easier than I thought, unfortunately. If you haven't already, now is a great time to clean up everything you want to. Remove any rust flakes. If you have any bolts that have rust on them, use like a wire brush, something just to clean it up. Like, I'm not reusing those, I got new ones. I'm reusing that, so I'm gonna clean that up. I'm gonna clean that up too, but do what you gotta do. Before you put the new part in, just make sure that they're the same. This is clearly identical. So we're good to go. So I know you're looking at an awkward place, but it's the best angle I could do to see both of these sides at the same time. So anyways, we're gonna install the new part, the lower control arm. Just make sure you have the studs, this faces down. Just make sure. All right, so when you're looking at this angle, you have, this is the orientation for the left side, the rearward one. Threads point towards the rear, bolt head points towards the front. Left, and then right. Again, front, rear, this is the passenger side, so. Bolt, nut camber, single assembly. So first, this is gonna hold the control arm in place, and the bolt itself will hold the left side in place. So of course, it sits in like this. I have to adjust the angle of the camera so I don't block you. It's the other side, great. If you can't, well, I'll show you. So, got the sleeve. Okay, so that's held in. Being that it's new, the control arm, if it's a little tight, don't be surprised. You could give it some love taps with the rubber mallet. Just give like a hit or two, a couple until it moves in place. Should be good. If it doesn't, and if it's really that tight, you can just spread apart the frame itself. All right, so let's just get this. All right. Now we're going to put it in this way. Just going to put the hardware on. I'll show you this side since you're already looking at it. So, bolt with the washer is there. The nut camber assembly goes on the other side. So kind of threads into that. Hand thread it first, tighten it up later. All right, other side. Okay, so bolts in. Gonna put this. So this is going to go in either one of two directions because you can see the notches. It lines up with the notches in the thread, the bolt itself. So it either goes this way or 180. I'd align it so it's, the same direction as the other side. All right, so that's it. Put the nut on. Get it in a good position. There we go. Just want it to be flush up against the frame. All right. Like I said, this is going to be really off when they do the alignment, but that's what I'm going there for. So once both sides are on, again, hand tight, don't use any wrenches yet. Too early for that. Now we're going to move on. Now we're just going to line up the strut to the lower control arm, and don't be afraid to put a jack under here to lift it up because you're gonna need that anyway. going to use a tapered punch to line up the holes of the strut. So I got my bolt, my washer. I'm going to go from the back towards the front. Let me adjust that, you can see that better. A lot of wiggling. Oh, there we go. You can use a rubber mallet to hit, actually, you know what? I'm going to use the punch on the head of the bolt. Almost there. Almost lined up. So close, yet so far off. Oh, there we go. All right, that's fully seated. Now we can put the washer and the nut back on. Hand tight. Torque it down later. Okay, good for now. Next up, we've got to install this bracket. So take off the nut. Take off the protective covering. Put the nut to the side. This goes on. Now, if you're not sure which direction it goes, it looks different on each end. This flat side goes more towards the front end. So where I am, this is the front, this is the back over here. So it just slips on like that. I'm gonna thread that calcium knot on a little bit. Just have to turn it a little bit. Makes it easier for you in a minute. All right. Now to put these mounting bolts back in here on the other side, you got to use a floor jack or just something to push up on this a little bit. It gets everything lined up. Makes it easier for you. So got to get the floor jack. There we go. I didn't have it jacked up enough, that's what it was. So same thing on the other side. Once you have enough threads in, you could use the impact 19mm. Jacks in the way. That thing has to be on tight, so don't be afraid to torque it down. Now we gotta torque these down to 166 foot-pounds. So again, 19mm. Alright, 166 foot-pounds, here we go. check. Double click, we're good. We're good. Now we can tighten down or torque down the castle nut. 19 millimeter. No, I'm sorry, not 19. That's a 24. This castle nut's 103 foot-pounds. All right. Now we have to insert this cotter pin through the hole. If the hole doesn't line up, you can tighten it, but don't loosen it. I mean the castle nut does not line up. It's a little tighter then. There we go. That's on. So all these are torqued and in. Now again, you're gonna need a wheel alignment for this, but the camber adjustment should be torqued down when the vehicle's at ride height. So you can simulate that by putting this jack underneath the control arm, raising the jack up. Alright, so the car's moving, so that's high enough. Now we're going to tighten these on both sides. It's 100 foot-pounds, 19 millimeter. I'm going to use an impact to tighten it up a little bit first. Other side too. Now we could torque them down to 100 foot-pounds. If the other side moves, I'll hold it with the wrench. If not, when I did it the other side, no, it's not moving. So that's good. So I don't have to hold it. And if you were reusing them, it'd be a good idea to put them in this, line them with the marks you made earlier. But these are new, getting an alignment regardless. So I'm not too concerned. That's good. Oh, gotta stop dropping the torque wrench. It'll be off balance. Or inaccurate, I should say. Alright, this side. And when you do these, just make sure these camber adjustments are flat up against the actual surface of the car. Good. No, I was sorry, 22 millimeter nut. That's what it was. Keep doing that. We're on there tight, so that's good. So camber bolts are in, both sides, they're torqued. Strut bolts in, torqued, and the 3 bolts on the bottom are in, well, 2 bolts in the nut. So lower control arm is done. Next up, just have to put the skid plate back on, wheels, and then we're good. In case I didn't say this before, I'm in the middle of replacing my rack and pinion, so there's no rack and pinion, no tie rods, no sway bar links. So that looks more empty here than it will in your car, but definitely don't need to replace those things, take those things. You definitely don't need to take those other parts off to do this. So, just an FYI. Alright, so for the front skid plate, this goes towards the front of the car. That's the back. You got 4 mounting positions for bolts, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, I only have 3 bolts. 1 of them broke off at some point in the past, so I just use zip ties too. First up, we're just going to put these clips in the holes right here. Alright, get a bolt ready. These are 12 millimeter bolts. First one's right here. Start all the bolts by hand before you tighten them down. Because if you tighten them down first, they won't all line up. Alright, so that's in there. Now we can hand thread the other one on the opposite side. Alright. Now if you have them, now you can tighten these. And I'm just going to snug them up. Other than to secure it to the car itself, I like to have the zip ties to keep vibration down from the skid plate. So now we're at the passenger side. Now we're just going to hand thread the nuts on. .21 millimeter, star-shaped pattern. Now we're going to lower the car and torque them down. Alright, so again, passenger side, torque it down to 83 foot-pounds, 21 millimeter socket. Good to go with that.